Welcome, everyone. Hi, everybody. Welcome. And good morning. I'm Lainey Cuthbert, the Vice President of Member and Sponsor Relations for the Columbus Metropolitan Club, and I'm glad to welcome you all here today. Thank you for coming. I am just curious, who is attending CMC for the first time? Anyone? Yay! Welcome very much. We're glad you're here, and we hope to see you more often. Regarding our masks, per the city's ordinance, CMC requires you to wear one. Of course, if you're eating and drinking, you can't wear one, but when you're done with doing that, please put it back on. Thank you very much for being respectful. We also love our phones, but we have determined that on the live stream, they are very loud. So if you'll take a moment to just put those on silent. Please continue using them, though, for your social media, and use the hashtag CMCForum. To welcome our guests, we are going to draw a winner from the Barnes and Thornburg guest giveaway. And Matt McCloskey is the winner. Where are you, Matt? Yay! In a few minutes, our presiding board member, Joelle Kazem, will join you and introduce our forum. Until then, enjoy your lunch, and thanks again for coming.
The Columbus Metropolitan Club was founded in 1976 by 13 women leaders who wanted to be included in the community conversation. I am Sally Bloomfield, and I was one of those 13 women. Having been left out of men's clubs that focused on community issues, it was a priority for us to make the club 100% inclusive.
Today, CMC presents public policy forums every Wednesday at lunch with average attendance of more than 200 people. I'm Tony Bell, and I frequently attend forums, which are open to everyone and present relevant, current, and newsworthy topics. I'm grateful that CMC is nonpartisan and presents many perspectives on every topic.
I'm Jane Scott, President and CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC is open to everyone. We invite you to explore the personal and professional benefits awaiting you at the Metropolitan Club. Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, including my colleague, Sally Bloomfield, CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone. I'm Joelle Kuzam, a partner with Bricker & Eckler, LLP, and a proud member of CMC's Board of Trustees. Let's begin by meeting our newest CMC members. And today we have a very fortunate long list of new members, so please hold your applause until we have read all of their names. From the Columbus Chamber of Commerce, we have Tim McKelly, Hope Cotter, Des Bryant, Sharice Thompson, Lori Holt, and Jeff Zimmerman. From Jobs Ohio, we have Tyler Alchin, Jerry Dan Miller, and Stacia Kusaiski. I apologize if I butchered that, from the Ohio History Connection. Carol Duffy, Anthony Forte with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Allison Lawler with Sean P. Dunn and Associates, Mayo Pujols with Andolin Bioscience, Tom Schmidt with the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium, Michael Triplett with Armidas Bio, and our newest lifetime member, Lisa Hinson of Hinson Limited. Help me thank them for their support of CMC. We also have some very special guests joining us today. We have students from Otterbein University's senior year experience civic leadership class. And students, if you could raise your hands and let us know where you're sitting, we're happy to welcome you. These students' curriculum includes attending CMC with John Comerford, the president of Otterbein University, and his wife Rachel, who are co-teaching the class. We encourage you to meet the Comerfords and these exceptional students. Welcome to CMC. We invite you to become a CMC member and your organization to become a CMC sponsor. On the back of your forum flyer are the organizations that provide the not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club with half of its annual revenue. To join this list of generous sponsors, please see Jane Scott or Lainey Cuthbert and let them know about your interest, and they will get you signed up. Today's forum is sponsored by Communities in Schools in Ohio, and today's live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Let's thank all of those supporting today's forum. So now on to today's very interesting topic. In just a few generations, American students have gone from one-room schoolhouses to keeping up with a global economy moving at the speed of light. And while technology advances faster and faster, America's educational institutions move at the rate at which students can learn. The two are often out of sync. Across America, wide gaps also exist between students and the educational opportunities around them. Today, our panel of experts will explore the definition and the promise of equitable education in America. The cost of educational inequality is a population that grows more divided, more susceptible to misinformation, and more dangerous to a stable democracy. There is so much at stake. Please welcome today's speakers. We've got Rebecca Kemper, researcher with the Center for Research and Evaluation at COSI. Kyra Schloenbach, Chief Academic Officer with the Columbus City Schools. And Dr. Latonia Stiner-Jones, Associate Dean of Graduate Programs and Associate Professor of Practice with the Department of Biomedical Engineering at The Ohio State University College of Engineering. And our host, who will join us on the stage momentarily, David DeWitt, Executive Editor of the Ohio Capital Journal. You can learn more about today's speakers in your forum flyer. David, welcome, and we look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Joelle, and welcome everybody. Nice to see you all here, and welcome to our panelists. So I'd like to start off with defining inequity in education. A lot of things might come to mind when we talk about equitable education. So I'd like to explore what equitable education looks like and what we mean when we say inequity. Would each of you share your perspective on what challenges we face around inequity in education and what you see educators striving toward when we talk about chasing the promise of equitable education? And Rebecca, we can start with you.
Sure, thank you. So I think one aspect is to think about what we're starting, looking at answering your question is why the word equitable? Why not equal? I think that's the core of this question. Equal simply means that we give the same resources to everyone, and we hope for the best. Equitable means that we look to where disparity exists, and we fill that gap so that everyone can achieve their best, that we look systematically for where people are left behind. So when we're looking at the educational system, it's not enough to just say, what are resources that are equal across, but how can we systematically find and address gaps that we know exist societally to make sure everyone can achieve what they can in terms of a learning environment. So that is sort of my perspective in terms of looking at education equity, is how to make sure that we're looking at that. And at a time with rapid technological advancement, those gaps can really become exacerbated quickly and at scales that are hard to catch up to. So it's very important to kind of understand what's happening in these spaces so that we can address them in real time.
So very similar to, and to build off what Becca just said, is when we think about education, and truly in our schools, we start with equal. That means our students get the same curriculum, the same resource, and access to those opportunities. But exactly that, when we talk about equity, that's our ability to systematically reach every student where they are so that they can reach their full potential. And that goes far beyond just resources and technology, but also what support do they need behaviorally, social, emotionally, academically, and really responding to every student where they are so that we tap their fullest potential so that when they graduate, they're able to be participants in a global community.
To build off of what my esteemed panelists have just added, I would just take it a step further and say that when I think about this definition, I think about what is it that we want our students to achieve and what do we need to provide them to meet them where they are so that they all can reach that common goal of receiving the quality education that they need in order to be good stewards of a global marketplace, which is the one that's ever changing rapidly. Technology is changing every day. And so how do we position them for success in a world that's different than the one in which many of us grew up in? And I think that that would be the equitable education that we're looking for.
Thank you all. So interesting, you all touched on an aspect of what I want to get into next, which is access to resources. So historically, the conversation around inequities in education have often revolved around school funding, access to resources, technology, before school and after school programs, and opportunities and extracurricular activities. But we've seen historical technological gaps that have traditionally existed between school districts with means and school districts without means. We've seen that gap close in recent years with remote learning and the pandemic. And the pandemic has helped many districts make progress on this technological gap. So I'm wondering, what impact has the increasing availability of technology had on the digital divide in education, and what obstacles still remain? And anyone can jump in as you feel like.
I'll start if we like. So to address that question, I think it's important for me to sort of set the stage here. And one of the things that I would say is I did a little bit of research before I came to this session, and I was looking at the Census Bureau data to see and get an idea of who has access to, say, internet. As we've seen with the pandemic, you're absolutely right, David, that we've seen some of those gaps close, but we've also seen some of those gaps expand. And the reason why is because right here in the state of Ohio and across the globe, we've seen students not have access to technology to learn remotely when we originally were shut down for the pandemic, and then even as recently as last fall when some schools had to go into remote learning. And so that stifled some of our students' ability to gain access to education, and that furthered the gap. And so when we think about, U.S. households, according to, census data, almost a little over half of the population, 53% of U.S. households have broadband internet. That means almost half don't. Either they don't have broadband or they don't have an internet connection at all. And that there's even more startling numbers, millions of students and millions of families and households that don't have access to a computer. And so if we think about it at that scale and that scope, at the rapid changing nature of technology and the ways in which our students today are able to absorb information. They have multiple means, modes, and mechanisms of digesting information outside of the traditional classroom space. And if they don't have access to that, then they're going to be left behind in some way. And so it's up to us to figure out creative ways so that we can address that gap, because it's not going to get smaller, it's only going to get larger because they're starting from a step or multiple steps behind.
So I can build on that exactly, and we saw that in our communities as the pandemic started, as we continue to live and educate through the pandemic. And I think one of the things that we realized was not just the device and that issue, that every student has a device, which thankfully to those emergency relief funds, we were able to respond and do that, and so many districts did the same. But also that notion that access to broadband internet is not a luxury, but an absolute necessity. And during the pandemic, we worked really closely with the city and community partners, many of which are represented here today, to ensure that our families had access to internet, because that is critical. You know, we used to think about our resources in the classroom as that textbook, and now it is technology and a computer in order to access the curriculum or experiences or their teacher. And so districts everywhere, certainly Columbus City, is committed to providing that one-to-one device, because it is the textbook now, it is the pencil. Students need to have it in order to be competitive when they graduate.
When we think about digital divide too, and I think as was alluded to, there's different aspects to it. And policy advocates sometimes have a slightly different definition. They'll look at digital divide and say, you only experience it when you are of a certain economic means, that you cannot afford broadband internet access. It's not something that's going to be sustainable from your household budget. That's a perspective out there, so I want to honor that. But the perspective that's changing in the literature for digital divide is what was alluded to here, which is that it's more than just broadband access, although that's critical, and I'll touch on that here in a minute in my answer. It's a combination of what devices you have access to at any time, and especially this is critical for students. If I have an older device, I sometimes cannot update that device to the newest operating system, which means I'm left out, I'm left behind. What's really interesting is when you look at the kinds of individuals who are able to be online, it changes radically with the advent of the iPhone. It looks like America now. It didn't before. You know, laptops are expensive up front. When you can pay month to month on a mobile device, it allows individuals to come into that space more, although it is more expensive in the long run. So there's a trade-off there, right? That's not really fair. So the digital divide as a definition of what it is evolving to really mean access to the internet at a speed of which it's useful, that you can actually do things, and also how do you access it? So there's different levels to it. And as Dr. Stiner-Jones alluded to too, there is quite a bit of census data looking at where this divide still occurs in terms of broadband access. The National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which is a policy advocacy group that's located here in Columbus as its home base, has done several reports on this and has looked at neighborhoods that were redlined historically and where broadband is not choosing to be added. It aligns highly. So we see these historic trends of non-investing in some certain communities persisting into the 21st century. And so this is sort of the nasty aspect of digital divide that's going to linger into the educational system. If people can't get on after school, that's an issue. They can't learn. And these are skills, as we're all operating in hybrid working environments, we know you need to have those skills now. That's going to be a skill set you have to have.
Great. Thank you all. Another aspect that I wanted to cover is, obviously, with increased access to technology, there's increased exposure to various forms of media, social and otherwise, that might have negative impacts on the emotional and mental social well-being of students. And so I was wondering what educators have been facing regarding the emotional and social well-being of students with access to this technology, and how you all responded to those types of challenges. Kyra?
Sure, I can start with that. So a little bit I want to flip this, because we know, and part of also my research is that we know that in 2018, 95% of teens across racial groups had access to a smartphone and were using it to access the internet. So conversations around safety in the internet and being there safely have been happening for a long time and certainly continue to happen at a higher rate and more targeted in response to the pandemic and the use of technology for access to the classroom. But also, I think it's important to note that during the pandemic, access to technology and media was critical for students' mental health. And we see that technology was even more important in research to Black students than white students for staying connected with friends and keeping their moods up at a difference between 58% and 45%. So while we certainly need to be cautious about social media and all that we know students face online bullying, cyberbullying, and our teachers are doing that, and talking and having those difficult conversations and engaging our families, which is another critical component to being stewards, to being good digital citizens. We also need to acknowledge that for a time, that technology and that media access was really important to the mental health of our students overall as they moved through the pandemic like all of us. We all learned to Zoom. My grandmother learned to Zoom in order to stay connected and to FaceTime. So I caution us to say that, there's a balance here. And that's really when we talk about what educators are facing. They're learning to strike that balance to empower our students and also help them be good digital stewards.
Great. Anyone else have thoughts to share on that? Again, so having access to technology is one thing, but becoming skilled at using that technology and knowing how to avoid some of the pitfalls is another. Again, here, educators are faced with an inequity of resources, not the physical, technological resources as much, perhaps, but the staffing and opportunities to appropriately develop digital skills and digital literacy among students. So I guess my question is, even with access to technology, what hurdles do educators face in their ability to help students truly learn the technology of the digital world and be able to apply it successfully?
I'll start that one. So one of the things that I see is our teachers are doing I would say a phenomenal job. They're working hard to educate our students, but one of I think the critical things we need to think about is, what additional resources do they need in order to get to that next step to develop curriculum based on technology? And we're not there yet. We don't have a set of standards or curricula or outcomes or even objectives or goals that we want our teachers to be able to meet in order to educate our students from a technological standpoint. And so we need to get to that point, just like we have set standards for math, science, language arts, we need to have set standards for technology. And we need to give them the professional development that they need in order to be able to develop those curricula, and also the time to be able to execute them. I mean, that's another piece of the puzzle. Curricula are already packed. What are the opportunities for us to think creatively about how we meaningfully embed technology into the existing curriculum? So it's not just an add-on, but it's a complement to what students already have to learn.
Absolutely. So I think to build on this is that districts have had technology courses for a long time. The difference now is that we're seeing those same principles and instruction embedded across all of our content, so that it isn't something separate and additional, but truly embedded in the classroom. I think that one of the opportunities that districts have is to build on what is going well with their use of technology. We've had coding courses, programming courses, the use of technology in our automotive and repair courses or cybersecurity. So what is going well in those places that we can offer that professional development and growth for our teachers so that we can build upon what we're doing. I think another example is that we can also learn from our students who may have been a little more prepared to be as reliant on technology than some of the adults were when we needed to make that full switch. And I think about the students that excelled during the pandemic and full virtual learning academically, and a response that some districts have taken to offer full virtual options. So like our blended program, where when we think about the creative opportunities mentioned with technology, our students attend virtually but also have opportunities for in-person touch points. And one of the things that our teachers can do is live stream from the zoo. So the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium isn't just a field trip that you go to, it's now the classroom. So how can we continue to think creatively, I think, is a incredibly fun opportunity for us as educators to really be innovative and harness the use of technology. And exactly as stated, it's going to take time, and we know that that is part of the cycle that we're in when we talk about equity, but it's certainly worth it and exciting, and I think our students have a lot that they can help direct in this work.
No, I mean, one of the aspects of this that has been touched on has been what are the learning objectives for being digitally literate, or as I like to say, technologically literate, and there's a slight difference there. It's not necessarily something where you can say you can't really create a test for it, right? In fact, some people have tried in California, and when they did for Google Suite, it turned out that if you didn't take the class, you did just about as well on the formal exam. So it's not something that is well suited for traditional formal education spaces, right? It's a vehicle for lifelong learning. I think one of the aspects here is, and was hinted at, is the youth themselves can be critical at doing this work and being in this space and being a touch point for where things are changing and what's going to be relevant for their generation moving forward. So I'm thinking about the Gen Yes model that's been funded through the Bill Clinton administration, and it is at school but out of classroom after classes, where you have youth ambassadors go through that are very well versed within and trained underneath the teacher through computational skills, computer skills, and they work with their peers. And it's sort of like a lab. And they do different activities together. That is what's called youth infusion. It is a way to embed, and I think that's where you're seeing where this really works, is if you can embed this using technology in the classroom, using computing, using these aspects, that's where it can work. I think another hurdle that just wasn't brought up too right now is just how much school administrations are being inundated with requests for different platforms too. And I think knowing that you cannot test for literacy in this way, what that suggests is there's no one platform that's going to solve this problem. You need to be well-versed. Students need to be exposed to different platforms that they're going to need to navigate in adulthood, but no one thing's going to be the solution. You must always have the adults be the guide. It has to be a communal experience if this is going to be a skill to have them be citizens.
So I want to latch on to an aspect of the conversation we just had about being innovative, reaching youth where they are. And I wanted to ask about the role of gaming. Gaming plays a big role in a lot of young people's social world. It's how many engage the digital world. So I was wondering, how can games tell a story to their players and have players go through the story and kind of emerge on the other side as better people? Can gaming be used to teach empathy and build positive social skills instead of inviting young people into isolation, for instance? Any thoughts on gaming?
Well, I have thoughts. These things are tools, and it's important to play with tools. It's important to have the space to do that so you can explore them. It's unfortunate that sometimes these spaces become, with chat lines and things, not welcoming. But it has always been a tension within gaming. Some of the initial game designers struggled with this. They were producing games and they realized, I don't know from a moral standpoint how happy I am to know that I've got a lot of people, potentially children, using my products that they're really playing the game to, do violent acts or do things that, I wouldn't really necessarily want them doing in real life. And what you saw was some intentionality by some of these authors to actually put in consequences for characters. That you had storylines evolve to be almost like choose your own adventure, but in the game world. And so if you did something that was maybe not ethically correct, your character would be penalized down the road. Maybe you couldn't actually win the game. So there are game designers that really do grapple with this question of how do you create a sense of, moral aspect of your character or your avatar. So that's there, but I think in broad strokes, when we're talking about education and gaming, it is important to be allowed to fiddle with things and to learn it on your own. But again, this is where it's important that you have elders, you have guides in these spaces to help along the way. So it's not that you can just set people loose on it and expect good results.
Yeah, I think when we, as we've said, when we've talked about the need to embed these skills, gaming, just as Becca mentioned, is an opportunity for students to use technology, connect over technology, and experience sometimes consequences, whether they double-crossed a friend in the game or didn't follow through. I mean, we know that the lessons, some of the greatest lessons we learn is because we've experienced them and not because they were directly taught to us. And certainly that can be represented as an opportunity in gaming.
Great. So another thing that I wanted to ask about was something I was reading about recently. In his book, Digital Divisions, How Schools Create Inequity in the Tech Era, author Matthew Raffalo makes the argument that often teachers may interpret technological skills very differently based on the race and class of their students. So while some teachers might praise affluent white students for being innovative when they bring pre-existing and sometimes disruptive skills into their classroom, they help them translate those skills into educational capital. But Raffalo's study shows that lower income students and students of color with the same skills might not get the same amount of mentorship and encouragement to capitalize on those skills and are often sometimes treated with suspicion even. So what can educators do to deconstruct some of those inherent biases and make sure that students are getting help and encouragement and mentorship they need to capitalize on their digital skills?
Sure, I can start with this one. So inherent biases we know we all carry, and they don't exist in a vacuum. Certainly, as it relates to technology, access to math and STEAM, when we think about education and programming, where other biases we know can exist. But systemically, as organizations, we don't just take the math department aside and target that inherent biases. We know we all carry them, and we address them holistically. And one of the core ways that we do that is the fundamental belief that every student can grow, every student can achieve, and every student is worthy of a rigorous education and to reach their fullest potential. And that really, truly, as an organization, once we start to believe that and truly believe that of all students, regardless of their race, their socioeconomic status, their ability or their orientation, or where they come from, is that they have a right to be there, and it's our privilege to really help them reach their fullest potential. And that belief is one of the largest steps we take as an organization to combat our inherent biases.
Within the college setting, we've leveraged implicit bias training for educational purposes so that not only our faculty, staff, but even our students can better understand what our biases are. As Kyra said, we all have these biases, and the degree to which we understand what they are improves our ability to be able to mitigate them. And so that is one tool that can be leveraged to make us aware so that we can address those, and it doesn't have a negative impact on our students.
Okay, and so another element to this is the type of content that students are allowed access to through technology. Often districts with underserved student bodies are more rigid in what content they allow the students to access and in what ways. It's done theoretically to limit potential disruptions, but are there other consequences around limiting access to content that might deprive some students of certain opportunities to learn important things?
I think it's something it has to be balanced, right? And one of the things that's happened during the pandemic has been how much instructors have realized it's hard to get content up there. So you might need to find an instructional video on YouTube, and then you find out, well, I can't, it's blocked at my school and I can't present it. This was happening a bit before the pandemic, but was happening even more. And when students were issued school-issued devices, that was also discovered as well. There's some safety rails there. This is, I mean, there's content out there that isn't great. There's content out there that's malware. You don't want students clicking on it, right? Anyone that's ever accidentally put a .com where a .org needs to be has had one of these domain whoopsie moments, right? But that's part of it, right? You need to know how to recover if you get into the wrong space. So I think what's been good has been how much schools are now reassessing these policies of what to allow students access to, reassessing that you do need to have skills in navigating social media nowadays, so not necessarily a full stop. It is a balance, though. It's something that needs to be decided by communities of how to go forward. But I think having hard stops on this can limit learning. It needs to be really evaluated more than just saying it's the internet and it's a distraction.
It absolutely does. And what we found from the very beginning was that we had to trust our parents and our students, because limiting their access to the internet had unintended consequences, just as it was articulated here, of accessing the curriculum. And sometimes that meant that because we didn't over-limit access, that meant that there were difficult conversations we had with families about where your web history went. But that's part of that. That's part of this cultural shift that we're making in order to have competitive students and really close this technological gap. So I don't know if I would agree that certainly research has shown that some districts may over-restrict. That wasn't the case. We needed to respond very quickly as a district so that our students had full access. And really, I think around that becomes the commitment between at-home monitoring and our monitoring too, and this joint respect and trust that we have for our students' behalf.
And I would just add to echo what my colleagues have said, it takes a village. It's not just the responsibility of the educator or of the district, it's also the responsibility of who's at home to help the child in order to be able to navigate the internet in an effective and responsible manner so that they're getting the content that they need in order to develop and thrive, but also are understanding how to avoid the content that can be disruptive and harmful for their development and growth and contribution to society.
That's a good lead into my next question, which has to do with kind of the media environment that we all exist in now. So students have their computers, they have access to the internet, let's say, and they're not too limited in content, but they still face another big hurdle that we all face, and that's the proliferation of lies and misinformation online. So what can the education community do to, one, teach students how to navigate the world of chaos and misinformation that often occurs online, being able to vet resources and think critically about the information they're being exposed to? And then two, what can the education community do to encourage students to be responsible citizens and users of technology themselves, not taking advantage of their digital skill sets to perhaps perpetuate lies and misinformation?
So I think one of the first steps we can take is really allowing our students and giving them opportunities to be leaders in their education and have opportunities for real problem-based learning, where they're not just directly learning about a technology or the use of the internet, but where that again is embedded in a true problem of practice that teams are coming together to solve, so that we're creating critical thinkers and communicators and problem solvers, so that these are the skills while they're learning technology and attending to the other standards that they know to be critical when they're out there seeing maybe fake news or responding to unkind comments online. And this happens with experience, it happens with practice, and with educators being facilitators, but really allowing giving students the opportunity and the space to engage in true problems of practice and using these lessons in a meaningful and authentic way.
Great. So in just a few minutes, we're going to move on to audience questions. So if you have a question, please make your way to the microphone now, and we'll get to you in a minute. I just have one more question, and then we'll go to audience questions. So for my final question that I wanted to ask here, obviously, so as we've discussed, funding can have a huge impact on the opportunities students enjoy. And having an access to a computer and no internet, like we mentioned, isn't of much use at all. But even though some of the hardware problems associated with the digital gap have narrowed, some access problems still remain. So what issues, like broadband, which we mentioned, so what issues are educators facing as far as access goes, and what steps are being taken to kind of alleviate that access problem?
Well, I mean, I would defer to the educator, but.
So I think steps that we're thinking about that we continue to take to combat some of our challenges is, one, continuing to support our families on how they can be facilitators and stewards at home, you know, across communities and just across communities. We know that some families are more skeptical of technology than others, and really helping families understand how they can support their students' use of technology is one way. Building that infrastructure that we alluded to at the very beginning, so that we're adopting resources and technology as it's being released. Providing the time that we heard earlier for professional development, so that we're using it in the best way that we can, and growing our teachers as well as our students. Those are infrastructure things to consider. And then I think also, similarly, continuing to really be innovative thinkers in how technology can change the way education looks. We're no longer talking about a traditional classroom. Overnight, that really changed. So how can we partner with districts across the country? How can we have students partner with districts across the country and access places that they otherwise might not be able to go? So I think that's an ongoing challenge that we are excited about. And lastly, I think we have to consider that not all of our students access their education through technology, even when we're fully virtual. And so, yes, technology is critical, but when we talk about equity in education, we have to know that non-digital opportunities for a rigorous education and opportunities is still critical to move all of our students.
And I would just add to that to say that at the university level, Ohio State, as an example, we provide a digital toolkit to all of our incoming students so that they will have a device. We teach them or provide them skills on how to develop their technological skills so that they can transition not only through academia, but also into the workforce, being much more effective at navigating technology.
I think I would add here, what's difficult is that it's, again, the speed of advancement and how much you need to provide devices, internet speed, and getting that up to date. But also, as we've talked about, it is very human intensive to do this kind of work, to develop this kind of literacy in students. And we are in this state operating in a space with House Bill 920 that was passed in the 70s, and it's hard to speed up funding. Your millage is capped for property taxes, and that means your schools are always asking you for a levy for anything that needs to happen. That's hard to deal with. It means you're always going to be behind getting resources in that's needed. And there's been court cases on this, but it's this is difficult. It does need resources to tackle this problem.
And to piggyback on that, which has been, school funding's a whole nother, public school funding, a whole nother panel discussion. But to piggyback on that has been a theme throughout this today, is that it really is going to take a community, and our partnerships. We partner with COSI, with Ohio State, with communities in school, loads, City Year, to really help us get there, because it will be to build this technology, this literacy that we're talking about, and we'll take everyone in the community to do it, and to do it well.
Thank you. So it's CMC's long-standing tradition to take audience questions. Doug Buchanan of CMC is curating questions from today's live stream audience. For our in-house audience, I see some people are up there. Please join Doug at the microphone. Please keep your questions brief and to the point. Doug, what is our first question?
Thank you, David. I just want to say thank you to Rebecca Kemper for bringing today's terrific topic to our attention. Thank you, Becca. We'll alternate questions from our live stream audience and then from our live audience as well. The first question comes from William Wason, retired from Ohio State. William asks, when history shows that our standard practices in education are as effective in producing dropouts as well as graduates, why is it so difficult to change the culture to reach historically neglected students?
I think that's a fantastic question. I think it's a question we ask ourselves in education all the time. But Becca alluded to it here, which is that these changes are not small. We're talking about huge changes in beliefs, in what we believe our students can do, what we believe our parents can help them do, and then add that to this technology conversation, the rapid changing, layer on our funding, which we'd be remiss to leave out, and we're talking about slow, deliberate changes, and it just takes time. And we wish we could flip a switch and be better, but it's a practice over time to get there.
My name is Rick Studer. In about 6 months, thousands and thousands of young people will be graduating from college and becoming first-year teachers. What's going on in the colleges of education about equity in education?
That would be a question for me, I presume. Wow. Well, what I can say is that I don't have all the answers. Being outside the College of Education, I do know that our College of Education is investing heavily in at educating our students with how to be effective teachers in the era of today, which is an era of rapid changing technology. Based on the policies and the practices of the university around diversity, equity, and inclusion being, at the core of everything that we're doing. I'm confident that that's embedded into the ways in which we're teaching. But without speaking out of turn, I don't want to commit the College of Education to anything beyond the scope of what I know in the College of Engineering.
Mindy Wright asks, not to complicate things, but beyond useful, consistent access to technology, are there creative approaches to the movement from in-person to remote and back again that have been created by staff or as a result of staff illness?
It was a complex one.
It was. Beyond useful, consistent access to technology, are there creative approaches to the movement from in-person to remote learning? And I guess in the same sense that organizations and companies have dealt with the hybrid environment, sometimes in person, sometimes working remotely, are there creative approaches that staff have implemented or that have been the result of staff illnesses?
So, yes, absolutely. So we've had to respond, of course, to when we have staff quarantined or even students quarantined, and a piece of that approach is ensuring that students have that device at home. They have someone at home that can help them use it so that we don't have large gaps of time where students aren't accessing their teacher or the content. I think in addition to that, we continue to think creatively about our partnerships and providing opportunities for students really to leverage technology to go to COSI without having to be at COSI. So I think those are exactly the right conversations and the right questions to ask as we continue to navigate this on really how can we be creative to benefit our students.
I'll say as an outside observer, what I've seen working too has been instructors that have used practices of asynchronous learning. So where those strategies and tactics, that's where you're seeing that really helpful, where you're sort of leaning into the fact that synchronous activity is going to be limited. People get tired very easily on Zoom. Adults do, kids do faster. And so where you can use those asynchronous learning tactics, it's gonna be very helpful.
And those don't have to just be with technology. That's teachers sending packets home or an assignment home. Not just things that can be accessed on the device.
I would also add, a part of that is just being thoughtful about how can you best provide the best opportunities for your students. And some of that is just thinking about, can we, create these asynchronous opportunities so that students that get sick or staff that get sick or may have to quarantine but are feeling okay can still continue their educational objectives in a different mode.
Hi, John Comerford, Otterbein University. Thank you for teaching our class today. You've done an excellent job. The issue of technology in inequity is important, and it's still relatively new, and that's why it's interesting. But I want to step back a little bit, because we could have been having a lot of this conversation 50 years ago in Central Ohio, and maybe not everything has changed the way we wanted it to change. We still have major inequities and inequalities in our educational system. So my question is, if you were in charge, you're governor, superintendent, mayor, you're everything, and could make structural changes to our regional educational system. You can change the school calendar, you can change the school districts and blow them up and change the boundaries, you can change the curriculum. The only thing that I'm going to put a limit on you is you can't just back up a dump truck of money and dump it on the problem. You can change funding sources, like maybe it shouldn't be property taxes or funding allocations, but if you were in charge, what would you do?
So I'll take a stab at that. I think in your question, you started by saying these are the same conversations. And yes, these are societal questions and issues, right? And it is a question of how do we prepare citizens for the rest of their lives. The problems and the challenges will be the same, but the modalities of which we can do that have changed. And so how do we move forward? Recently, I had the opportunity to co-author a paper with Dennis Harper, and we tried to take a stab at this a little bit. And actually, we steered away from funding streams. I have my own feelings about that, but there's a reality of how quickly you can even change that. And it has to do a lot with embedding technology in different courses and making sure that when students are answering and looking critically at content, they're using the internet. They're getting feedback on what is a good resource. That's one aspect. The other aspect is having intentional crossover between schools in different districts and sometimes in different states. That was sort of the bigger dream, that you would have instructors across places that are completely different interacting, because that's gonna expose you to not just the tools of which to navigate the world, but the people as well. It's both. You're gonna need a lot of human resources to do that, but it is a trick of embedding technology into looking at different subjects.
If I had the opportunity, in setting funding aside, I would say a little bit differently that we need to engage our students to be true leaders in their education. I've said it multiple times today. Historically speaking, we continue to have the same conversations because we have a very passive education system overall, and a very sit and get mentality. And we really can make these shifts and really engage students when we ask them what are their passions, and how can we align those passions to what the standards say we need to teach. But we're missing a real partner in the education system right now when we leave out students. And that when we talk about risk on our democracy, to leave out students, that's really at risk, because we're failing to prepare them to be active and global citizens.
Hi, my name is Nidhi Satyani, and my question is a little bit of a two-part question. So historically, when we look at the successes of supporting those who needed additional supports, there's always been an important role for allies, right? So if we look at women's rights, there's been an important role for men. When we talk about minority rights, there's been an important role for those who are not minorities. We talk about LGBTQ rights, there's an important role for cis and straight allies. So my two-part question is, one, I think naturally the more affluent school districts are an ally in this conversation. So what do you see as their role in the conversation around equity in education? And two, who are some of the other people that need to be tapped as allies? Is it businesses? Are there other people that you think would be important allies in this conversation?
Certainly, we've heard today the need for partnership. So if you're a local business, please let us know if you want to partner with us, and tell us what you're looking for in who you want to hire and the skills that you're looking for. That is incredibly helpful. But beyond that, we partner with smaller neighboring suburban districts like Dublin and Upper Arlington and Hilliard. And really, we're looking at opportunities for teachers to have teacher externships and learn from each other, but also go into the community together to look at what are those skills needed and required that we should be bringing into the classroom, and how can we make that authentic. So you're dead on when you say that we should be partnering. No one is alone in education, and absolutely, I think, to continue to build on our partnerships with local districts, but also that community and business piece is critical as well.
I think part of your question too, with the allyship and identity, it's so critical to any career pathway, workforce development. And David had mentioned too, research in which there's subtle ways that individuals with underrepresented identities get pushed off track, whether it be suspicion or just not recognized. It's gender too, it's sexuality too. The trick really is, how do you use students that are not traditionally in that mode of being recognized as someone that would like mathematics, computer science, robotics? How do you make sure that technology is relevant to all of your students so that you can leverage students of different identities to bring in their friends? So much of this much of it is bias, but it's also just not being creative about what we're thinking sometimes in terms of engaging our students. It's not that we're not all working hard, but it's sometimes going, gee, can we embed technology in drama class? Can we embed technology within the creative arts writ large. Spaces where content creation is natural. That's what really makes things relevant, is can you make something on your own? It's a digital artifact now with this technology. And that can be a way, outside of districts, collaborating, that at the school level, you can engage more identities.
I would also add that think about ways that our schools can work collectively together to leverage partnerships with companies, so that students will have access to not only opportunities for employment, but also a better understanding through experiences of what those opportunities will provide for them. I know some of our more affluent communities have, access to, experiences that not all communities have access to. So can we create allyship around that? Are there opportunities for us to work together so that the students at the other schools can also engage in those experiences and those opportunities, so that they might not otherwise have an opportunity to engage with?
I think we are out of time for questions. I think that's a great place to wrap up here. Our schools and education systems are such a critical reflection of our values as a society, and I appreciate the talk about the communal effort that they require. So we wish we had more time, but for now I'll turn it back over to Joelle for concluding remarks.
Thanks, David. And clearly, this was an engaging topic based on the number of questions and thoughtful responses that we got. And like our students from Otterbein are being asked to do, they'll debrief this subject on Monday in their class. I would ask each of you to continue this dialogue with your families over dinner, with your coworkers and friends, and to do your share to heighten education and access to education for all students. So please make plans to join us next week as CMC presents Untangling the Global Supply Chain, Ohio's Key Role, featuring a panel of experts. And I'd like to wrap up by thanking today's sponsors, communities and schools in Ohio, as well as our virtual seat patrons and the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. And our special appreciation to today's speakers, Dr. Rebecca Kemper, Kyra Schloenbach, Dr. Latonia Stiner-Jones, and our host, David DeWitt. Thank you all for joining us. We couldn't do this without you. We look forward to seeing you next week at the Columbus Metropolitan Club as we present another community conversation. Thank you.